When my son died, my daughter-in-law inherited the house and $37 million. As soon as the money hit her account, she kicked me out of the house. I won't support a sick old man. Go find a nursing home. On Monday, my lawyer called. Did you read the will to the end? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought I'd have to bury my own son. At 59, I assumed I'd go first, that Michael would be the one standing over my grave, not the other way around. But there I was, watching them lower my boy into the ground while rain pelted the black umbrella I could barely hold steady. Michael had been everything to me after Sarah died 8 years ago. My anchor, my reason to keep going. At 32, he was just hitting his stride as a construction foreman, finally talking about maybe giving me grandchildren with Violet. Then that drunk driver ran the red light on Highway 45, and everything changed in an instant. The funeral home was packed. Michael had touched so many lives. I sat in the front pew, my hands shaking from both grief and the early stages of Parkinson's that I'd been hiding from everyone. Violet sat beside me, her hand on my arm, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. "He was so proud of you, Dad," she whispered to me during the service. "He always talked about how strong you were, how you raised him right after Mom died." I squeezed her hand, grateful that at least Michael had found someone who seemed to truly care about family. Violet had always been attentive during our Sunday dinners, asking about my health, my medications, making sure I was eating enough. She'd been the daughter I never had. After the burial, people filtered back to Michael's house, the one he'd worked so hard to buy just 3 years ago. It was a beautiful place, 2 stories with a wraparound porch that reminded me of the farmhouse where I'd grown up. He'd been so proud when he got the keys. "Dad, you should sit down," Violet said, guiding me to Michael's favorite recliner. "You look exhausted." She was right. I felt like I'd aged 10 years in the past week. The Parkinson's symptoms seemed worse when I was stressed, and losing Michael was the worst stress imaginable. My hands trembled more, my balance was off, and some days I forgot to take my medications. That's when Robert Chen, Michael's lawyer, cleared his throat. If I could have everyone's attention, Michael left specific instructions about reading his will today. The room grew quiet. I'd known Michael had made a will when he bought the house, but we'd never really talked about it. He was young, healthy. "Who thinks about death at 32? Robert opened a manila folder and began reading in his careful, professional voice. Most of it was standard legal language that went over my head. Then he got to the important part. "To my beloved wife, Violet Marie Hartley, I leave my house at 847 Maple Street. All its contents, my life insurance policy valued at $37 million, and all my savings and investment accounts." $37 million. I nearly choked. I had no idea Michael had that much money. The life insurance alone was staggering, but apparently he'd been making smart investments since he started working at 18. People in the room murmured in amazement. Violet's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He never told me about most of this," Robert continued. "However, my father, Eric James Hartley, shall have the right to live in the house at 847 Maple Street for as long as he wishes, with all expenses paid by the estate. Violet is to ensure his comfort and care." I felt tears prick my eyes. Even in death, my boy was taking care of me. I'd been worried about how I'd manage on just my small Social Security payments, especially with my health declining. The house I'd been renting was too expensive, and I'd been considering moving to one of those senior communities that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. "Michael was always thinking ahead," I said to Violet as people began to leave. "He knew I'd need help." She nodded, still looking stunned by the inheritance. "Of course, Dad. This will always be your home, too. Michael would want that." Over the next few days, Violet was incredible. She helped me pack up my few belongings from my rental and move into the guest room upstairs. She made sure I had all my medications organized, cooked meals that were easy for me to eat with my increasingly shaky hands, and never once complained about the extra work. "You're not a burden," she assured me when I apologized for spilling soup on the kitchen table. "You're family. Michael loved you more than anything, and I can see why." For the first time since the accident, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was how it was supposed to be. Maybe Michael's death, horrible as it was, had brought Violet and me together in a way that would honor his memory. I was so grateful for her kindness that I didn't notice the way she'd started going through Michael's papers late at night, or how she'd been making phone calls in hushed tones. I didn't see her measuring rooms with a tape measure or taking photos of the house's interior. Looking back, I should have paid attention to those small signs. But I was drowning in grief. My body was betraying me more each day, and I was just thankful not to be alone. The inheritance money came through quickly. Violet showed me the bank statement one morning over coffee, her hands trembling as she held the paper. "I can't believe this is real," she said. $37 million. Michael was always smart with money, I told her. Even as a kid, he'd save every penny of his allowance. She smiled, but something in her expression seemed different, distant. He certainly was. That night, I heard her on the phone again, but this time I caught a few words as I made my way to the bathroom. She was talking to someone about finally being free and not having to pretend anymore. I figured she was talking about grief, about not having to pretend she was okay when she was hurting inside. We all grieve differently, and maybe she needed to put on a brave face for my sake. I wish I'd listened more carefully. The change started small, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. About a week after the inheritance money cleared, Violet's demeanor began to shift. The warm smiles became rare, replaced by thin, practiced expressions that never reached her eyes. It began with the meals. Where she'd previously made sure I had hearty portions of foods that were easy for me to manage with my trembling hands, now she served me smaller plates with items that were difficult to cut or required steady coordination I no longer possessed. "You need to watch your portions, Dad," she said one evening, sliding a meager serving of chicken and vegetables across the table. "At your age, with your condition, overeating isn't good for you." I stared at the plate, my stomach already growling. I'd lost almost 15 pounds since Michael's death, partly from grief, partly from the Parkinson's affecting my appetite. "This doesn't seem like enough," I said carefully. Violet's jaw tightened. "I researched proper nutrition for elderly people with Parkinson's. This is exactly what you should be eating." Elderly. The word stung. I was 59, not 90. But I didn't argue. She was grieving too, I told myself. Maybe controlling my meals made her feel like she was helping somehow. Then came the medication schedule. Violet announced she'd be managing all my prescriptions to ensure I didn't accidentally overdose or miss doses. "I've been taking my own medications for 40 years, I protested, as she organized the pills into a weekly dispenser. "Things are different now," she said, without looking at me. "Your condition is progressing. Michael worried about you forgetting things." That wasn't true. Michael had never expressed concerns about my memory, and my neurologist had said my cognitive function was still good. But when I tried to retrieve my pill bottles from the kitchen cabinet, I found them gone. "Where are my medications?" "Locked away safely," Violet said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "You'll get them when you're supposed to get them." The temperature in the house became another point of contention. She kept the thermostat set to 68 degrees, which left me constantly cold. My body didn't regulate temperature well anymore, and I found myself wearing sweaters indoors, even though it was late spring. "The utility bills are enormous," she complained when I asked if we could turn up the heat. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to heat this entire house?" "But Michael said all expenses would be paid from the estate," I reminded her. Her eyes flashed with something cold. "Michael's dead, Dad. The money isn't unlimited, and I have to be responsible with it." $37 million, and she was worried about the electric bill. The worst part was how she'd started talking to me. The gentle, caring tone she'd used during Michael's funeral was completely gone, replaced by the kind of voice you'd use with a child who'd misbehaved. "Eric, you need to be more careful in the bathroom," she said, after I'd had a minor accident due to medication timing issues. "I'm not going to clean up after you every day." "I'm sorry," I said, mortified. "It's the Parkinson's. Sometimes I can't—" "I know what it is," she cut me off, "but you need to try harder." Try harder. As if I could will away a neurological disease. One evening, as I struggled to cut a piece of meat she'd served me, She watched with visible irritation. "You're making a mess," she said finally, taking the fork and knife from my hands. "Here." She cut the meat into tiny pieces like I was a toddler, then set the utensils down with more force than necessary. "There." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I can still do some things for myself, Violet." "Can you?" she asked, her eyebrows raised. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you need help with pretty much everything." That night, lying in bed, I tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't the same woman who'd sat beside me at Michael's funeral, who'd promised to take care of me. This was someone else entirely, someone who viewed my presence as an inconvenience. I thought about calling Michael's best friend, Dave, to talk through my concerns, but realized Violet had removed the phone from my room. When I asked about it the next morning, she said it was being repaired. "Can I use the phone in the kitchen?" "I'm expecting important calls about the estate," she said. "Maybe later." Later never came. The isolation was the hardest part. Violet had gradually stopped mentioning when people called for me or when mail arrived. She handled all the correspondence, she said, to take the burden off me. But I began to suspect she was screening my calls and mail, deciding what I was allowed to know about. When I asked to visit Michael's grave one afternoon, she sighed heavily. "Dad, I have errands to run. Maybe next week." Next week became next month, which became never mentioned again. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own son's house. Every request was met with irritation, every need treated as an imposition. And through it all, Violet maintained the pretense that she was doing me a favor. "You're lucky I'm willing to take care of you," she said, during one particularly tense dinner. "Most people your age, with your condition, end up in nursing homes." The threat was subtle, but clear. Behave, or else. That night, I lay awake thinking about Michael. Had he really known this woman, or had she fooled him the same way she'd fooled me initially? The Violet I was living with now seemed incapable of the love and devotion she'd displayed for the past 3 years. I thought about the phone calls I'd overheard, the ones where she talked about being free and not having to pretend. Maybe she'd been pretending all along. Maybe Michael's death hadn't revealed Violet's grief. It had revealed who she really was. The next morning, I found her going through Michael's personal belongings in the closet, sorting them into boxes. "What are you doing?" "Donating his clothes," she said, without looking up. "There's no point keeping them." She held up Michael's high school varsity jacket, the one he'd been so proud of. Without ceremony, she tossed it into a box marked for goodwill. "Wait," I said, reaching for the jacket. "I'd like to keep that." She pulled it away from me. "You don't need more clutter in your room." I stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't about grief or stress or adjustment. This was about power. Michael was gone, the money was hers, and now she was showing me exactly where I stood in her world, at the very bottom. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in June, exactly 2 months after Michael's funeral. I'd woken up feeling particularly unsteady, my medication schedule having been adjusted by Violet the previous week to what she claimed was a more efficient dosing pattern. What it really meant was that I was getting my pills later in the day, leaving me shaky and disoriented for hours each morning. I'd made my way carefully down the stairs, gripping the banister with both hands, when I noticed boxes stacked in the living room. Not donation boxes this time, but moving boxes, professional ones with labels and packing tape. "What's all this?" I asked Violet, who was standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and what looked like real estate brochures spread across the counter. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her expression was cold and businesslike. "I'm making some changes." "Changes? This house is too big for what I need," she said, her voice matter of fact. "I'm looking at condos downtown, something more manageable." My heart started pounding, and not in a good way. "What about me?" She set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "What about you? Where am I supposed to live?" For the first time in weeks, Violet looked directly at me, and what I saw in her eyes made my blood run cold. There was no warmth, no compassion, no recognition that I was a human being who'd just lost his only child. There was nothing but irritation and contempt. "Eric, let's be realistic here. You need more care than I can provide. You can barely get dressed by yourself anymore." "That's not true," I protested, though we both knew my motor skills had deteriorated significantly since she'd taken over my medication schedule. "Look at yourself," she said, gesturing at my appearance. I looked down and realized my shirt was buttoned wrong, my pants were stained from breakfast I didn't remember eating, and my hair was uncombed. "You're falling apart." The medications." "The medications are exactly what the doctor prescribed," she cut me off. "Your condition is getting worse, and I can't be responsible for you anymore." I felt the familiar tremor in my hands intensify. "Michael wanted me to live here. It's in his will." Something flickered across Violet's face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Michael's gone, Eric. The will was written when he thought you'd be able to take care of yourself." "I can take care of myself?" "Really?" He walked over to the kitchen sink and pointed to a pile of dishes. "You left the stove on for 6 hours yesterday. You forgot to flush the toilet 3 times this week. You tried to take your evening pills at breakfast time." Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Some of them were true, some were exaggerated, and some I was pretty sure were outright lies. But my memory had been foggy lately, and I couldn't be certain. "There are places that specialize in caring for people with Parkinson's," she continued, her voice taking on a fake sweetness that was somehow worse than her coldness. "Places where you'd have professional help, activities with people your own age, proper medical supervision." "You mean nursing homes?" "I mean care facilities." "I don't want to go to a care facility. This is my son's house. This is where I belong." That's when the mask finally came off completely. "No," Violet said, her voice rising for the first time. "This is my house now, mine. Michael left it to me, and I get to decide who lives here." I staggered backward, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "He wanted me to be taken care of." "He wanted you to be comfortable," she snapped. "He didn't want you to be my burden for the rest of your life." "Burden." The word hung in the air between us like a slap. "I'm not a burden," I said quietly. Violet let out a harsh laugh. "You're kidding, right? You can't dress yourself, you can't remember to take your pills, you leave messes everywhere, you eat like a child, and you need help with everything. How is that not a burden?" Tears started forming in my eyes, partly from the cruelty of her words and partly from the realization that this had been her plan all along. She'd been documenting my struggles, maybe even sabotaging my independence, building a case for why I couldn't live here anymore. "Michael loved me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Michael felt sorry for you," she shot back. "There's a difference." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down before my legs gave out completely. "I've already contacted several facilities," Violet continued, her voice returning to that fake professional tone. "There's one about an hour away that has an opening next week. Sunshine Manor. It's very nice. I won't go." "You don't have a choice, Eric. I'm not going to spend the next 10 years cleaning up after you while you slowly deteriorate." The will says you can live here as long as I'm able to care for you," she interrupted. "Well, I'm not able anymore. You need more help than I can provide." I knew that wasn't what the will said, but I couldn't remember the exact wording, and Violet spoke with such authority that I began to doubt myself. "What if I got better?" I asked desperately. "What if I tried harder?" She shook her head with mock sympathy. "Oh, Eric, Parkinson's doesn't get better. It only gets worse. And frankly, I'm not willing to watch that happen while sacrificing my own life." "Your own life?" "I'm 28 years old," she said, and for the first time I heard real emotion in her voice. Anger, resentment. I should be traveling, dating, enjoying my youth. Instead, I'm stuck playing nursemaid to an old man who isn't even my real father. Dearest, the truth of what she thought about me, about Michael, about everything came pouring out like poison from a broken bottle. "Michael was a good man, but he was naive," she continued. "He thought everyone was as selfless as he was. Well, I'm not. I didn't sign up to spend my 20s changing adult diapers and pretending to care about an old man's stories about the good old days." I sat there in stunned silence as she destroyed every assumption I'd had about her, about their marriage, about the life Michael thought he was building. "So here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice calm again, but with an edge of steel. "You're going to pack whatever you can fit in 2 suitcases. I'll drive you to Sunshine Manor next Tuesday. Your Social Security will cover the basic costs, and I'll pay the difference for the first year out of Michael's money. After that, you're on your own. And if I refuse?" Her smile was cold and predatory. "Then I'll call Adult Protective Services and tell them about an elderly man with Parkinson's who's living in unsafe conditions, forgetting his medications, leaving stoves on, and becoming a danger to himself and others. They'll remove you from the house and place you wherever they see fit." I realized then that she'd been setting me up for weeks, creating situations that would support her story. The forgotten medications, the unsafe behaviors, the increasing dependency she'd fostered by taking away my autonomy piece by piece. "You planned this," I said, more to myself than to her. "I planned to be rich and free," she replied. "Michael gave me the first part. Now I'm taking the second." She walked over to the counter and picked up a business card, sliding it across to me. "Sunshine Manor. You have until Tuesday to get used to the idea." As she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my shattered world, she called over her shoulder, "Oh, and Eric? Don't bother trying to call anyone. I've already explained to your few remaining friends that your condition has made you paranoid and delusional. No one's going to believe anything you say." I sat there in Michael's kitchen, in what had been my home for 2 months and should have been my sanctuary for whatever time I had left, and realized I was completely, utterly alone. Sunshine Manor turned out to be neither sunny nor much of a manor. It was a tired-looking building with yellow-stained walls and carpets that smelled of industrial disinfectant, mixed with something I preferred not to identify. My room was 8 by 10 feet, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a chair that had seen better decades. Violet had driven me there herself, maintaining her mask of concerned caregiver until the very moment the admission paperwork was signed. Then, without so much as a goodbye hug, she'd handed me my 2 suitcases and walked out of my life. "Don't worry, Mr. Hartley," the nurse had said, her voice professionally cheerful. "You'll adjust to our routine in no time." Their routine involved waking up at 5:30 for medications, breakfast at 6:30 consisting of watery oatmeal or rubbery eggs, and then a long day of sitting in the common room watching television programs I had no interest in. The other residents were mostly in worse condition than I was, either lost in dementia or so physically impaired they could barely communicate. My Social Security check of $1,400 per month covered the basic room and board. Barely. The difference Violet had promised to pay turned out to be minimal, covering only the most basic medical supervision. Physical therapy, specialized Parkinson's medications, or any activities beyond sitting in the common room required additional payments I couldn't afford. Within a month, my condition had deteriorated noticeably. The stress of displacement, combined with the facility's rigid medication schedule that didn't align with my individual needs, made my tremors worse and my balance more unstable. I fell twice in my first 6 weeks there, once badly enough to require stitches in my scalp. The worst part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the isolation. It was watching Violet's life unfold on social media through the tablet one of the aides let me use during scheduled computer time. Her Facebook page was a parade of expensive restaurants, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. There were photos of her in Paris, shopping on the Champs-Élysées, with bags from stores whose names I couldn't even pronounce. Pictures from a week-long stay at some resort in the Maldives. Her posts talking about finally finding herself and embracing freedom. The comments on her posts were even more painful to read. "You deserve this happiness after everything you've been through? So glad to see you healing and living your best life. Michael would be so proud to see you thriving." She'd crafted a narrative where she was the grieving widow who'd made the difficult but necessary decision to place her elderly father-in-law in professional care. She was the hero of her own story, and I was just a sad footnote that she'd handled with grace and responsibility. Meanwhile, I was eating instant mashed potatoes for dinner and counting out quarters to buy a candy bar from the vending machine. One particularly difficult day in August, about 3 months after she'd deposited me at Sunshine Manor, I was sitting in the common room when I overheard 2 aides talking near the nurses' station. "Did you see that woman's car?" one of them was saying. "That silver Mercedes convertible? The one visiting Mr. Patterson? No, the one who dropped off that Parkinson's guy a few months ago. Hartley, I think? My ears perked up. They were talking about Violet. She was here yesterday asking about his condition, the first aide continued. Real concerned, acting, you know. But then I saw her outside on the phone laughing about something, and it didn't seem like someone worried about family. Some people handle stress differently, the second aide said diplomatically. Maybe. But she was asking weird questions, like about his mental state, whether he was having delusions, if he was telling stories that didn't make sense. That's not unusual. Families worry about cognitive decline, I guess, but she seemed more interested in what he was saying to other people than in how he was actually doing. The conversation moved on, but their words stuck with me. Violet was monitoring me even from a distance, making sure her story remained intact. She was worried I might tell someone the truth about how I'd ended up here. The truth was, I had tried to tell people. I'd called Michael's friend Dave from the payphone in the lobby, but when I tried to explain what had happened, he gently suggested that grief sometimes made people see things that weren't really there. Violet had done her work well, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state before I'd even been moved. I'd written letters to my few remaining relatives, but either they didn't respond or they sent back carefully worded replies about how difficult it must be to adjust to changes and how they were sure Violet was doing her best in a difficult situation. The isolation was crushing. I'd lost my son, my home, my independence, and now even my voice. No one believed me because Violet had systematically destroyed my credibility before I even knew I was under attack. My health continued to decline. The generic medications the facility provided weren't as effective as the name-brand ones I'd been taking before. My physical therapy consisted of a few minutes with an overworked aide who had me do basic arm exercises while she checked her phone. My diet was institutional food designed more for economy than nutrition. I lost another 20 pounds, bringing my total weight loss to nearly 40 pounds since Michael's death. My clothes hung on me like I was a scarecrow. My hand shook so badly I could barely hold a fork, and my balance was so poor I had to use a walker to get around safely. But the worst part was the nights. Lying in that narrow bed, listening to the sounds of other residents crying out in their sleep, or calling for family members who never came, I felt like I was already dead. This wasn't living, it was just existing, counting down the days until my body finally gave up. Sometimes I wondered if that was Violet's plan all along. Maybe she figured if she could just wait me out, let the stress and poor conditions do their work, she wouldn't have to worry about any inconvenient questions or claims on Michael's estate. Dead men tell no tales, and dying men aren't believed when they try. One evening in September, as I was struggling to button my pajamas with fingers that wouldn't cooperate, I caught sight of myself in the small mirror above my dresser. The man looking back at me was barely recognizable. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, defeated. This wasn't who Michael's father was supposed to be. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of continuing to waste away in self-pity, I was going to fight back. I didn't know how, and I didn't know if anyone would listen, but I wasn't going to die without trying to reclaim some piece of the dignity Violet had stolen from me. I started making notes about everything I could remember from those final weeks in Michael's house. Every conversation, every small cruelty, every manipulation. I wrote down dates and times, conversations I'd overheard, changes in my treatment that couldn't be explained by medical necessity. I also started reaching out to anyone who might listen, determined to find at least one person who would hear my story without dismissing it as the delusions of a sick old man. What I didn't know was that someone was already looking for me. The call that would change everything was less than a week away. The call came on a Thursday morning in late September, just as I was finishing my breakfast of lukewarm oatmeal and weak coffee. One of the aides approached my table with a concerned expression. "Mr. Hartley, there's a phone call for you at the front desk. Someone says it's urgent legal business." I made my way slowly to the nurse's station, my walker clicking against the worn linoleum floor. Legal business? The only legal matter in my life was Michael's will, and that had been settled months ago. Or so I thought. The nurse handed me the receiver with a sympathetic smile. "Take your time, honey. Mr. Hartley, this is Robert Chen, Michael's attorney. I need to ask you something very important." His voice was tense, more serious than I remembered from the funeral. "Hello, Robert," I managed, my voice hoarse from disuse. I rarely spoke to anyone anymore except to answer direct questions from the staff. "Mr. Hartley, I have to ask you directly. Did you read Michael's will completely, all the way to the end?" The question caught me off guard. I thought so. You read it at the house after the funeral." "I read the primary provisions," Robert said carefully, "but there were additional clauses, specifically Clause 4. Did Violet ever mention Clause 4 to you?" My heart started beating faster. "No." "What is Clause 4? There was a long pause, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. "Mr. Hartley, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. And I need you to be completely honest with me about your current living situation." "Okay," I whispered, gripping the phone with both shaking hands. Clause 4 of Michael's will states that if at any time his wife, Violet, fails to provide adequate care for you, or if she forces you to leave the family home against your will, or if she demonstrates neglect or abuse toward you, then the entire inheritance, the house, the money, everything, reverts to you immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down in the chair beside the nurse's station. "What?" "Michael was very specific about this provision," Robert continued. "He was concerned about, well, let's just say he had some doubts about Violet's true character. He wanted to ensure you'd be protected. But she told me, she said the will allowed her to put me in a care facility if I needed more help than she could provide." "That's absolutely false," Robert said, his voice hardening. "The will specifically states that you have the right to live in that house for as long as you wish, and that Violet is obligated to ensure your comfort and well-being. Placing you in a care facility against your will, especially under false pretenses, is a direct violation of the will's terms." I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was telling me. "How did you find out where I was?" "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," Robert explained. "When I couldn't get through to the house phone, I started investigating. I discovered you'd been placed at Sunshine Manor, and frankly, Mr. Hartley, what I found disturbed me greatly. She told everyone I was getting worse, that I needed professional care. I've spoken with your neurologist, Dr. Martinez. According to him, your condition was actually stable before you left the house. He said the medications Violet claimed to be giving you weren't the ones he prescribed." The room seemed to spin around me. "What do you mean?" "He prescribed extended-release medications to help manage your symptoms throughout the day. But according to the pharmacy records I pulled, Violet was picking up immediate-release versions and giving them to you at times that would make your symptoms worse." My mind raced back to those final weeks in Michael's house, remembering how much worse I'd felt, how my tremors had increased, how confused I'd become. She was making me sicker? "It appears that way. Dr. Martinez said that with proper medication management and physical therapy, there's no medical reason you couldn't continue living independently with minimal assistance." I started crying then, right there at the nurse's station, not caring who saw me. Months of believing I was failing, that my mind was going, that I was becoming the burden Violet had convinced me I was, and it had all been lies. "Mr. Hartley, are you all right?" "She planned this," I said through my tears. "She planned all of it." "I believe you're correct," Robert said grimly. "And now we need to do something about it. Are you willing to fight this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean reclaiming what's rightfully yours, the house, the money, all of it. Michael intended for you to be taken care of, and instead, you've been abandoned and abused. We can fix this. But how? Who's going to believe me now? I'm in a nursing home, I've lost weight, I look terrible. She's made sure everyone thinks I'm delusional." "Mr. Hartley, Clause 4 doesn't require anyone's opinion about your mental state. It's triggered automatically by specific actions, which Violet has clearly taken. More importantly, I've been documenting everything." "Documenting?" Michael was very thorough in his instructions. He anticipated this possibility and left me specific guidelines for investigating any potential violations of his will. I've been monitoring Violet's financial activities, her public statements, her social media presence. I thought about those Facebook posts, the expensive trips, the casual dismissal of the man she'd promised to care for. She's been quite public about her new lifestyle, Robert continued, posting about her freedom, her travels, her expensive purchases. Meanwhile, you're in a substandard care facility, surviving on Social Security. The contrast is illuminating. What happens now? Now, Mr. Hartley, you come home. I'm driving up there today to collect you. We'll get you proper medical care, restore your correct medications, and begin the legal process of enforcing Michael's will. But what about Violet? What about the house? She's living there. Robert's voice took on a tone I'd never heard from him before. Cold, determined, almost predatory. She's about to discover that actions have consequences. When Michael wrote that will, he made it very clear that if Violet showed her true colors, she would lose everything. Well, she's shown them, and now she's going to lose everything. All of it? Every single penny, Mr. Hartley. The house, the investments, the life insurance money, all of it reverts to you under Clause 4. Michael was very specific about that. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. For months, I'd been existing in a fog of despair, believing I was powerless, forgotten, destined to waste away in this place until I died. Now I was being told that not only was I not powerless, but that I was actually the rightful heir to everything Violet had stolen from me. There's something else, Robert added. Michael left detailed instructions about what to do if this situation arose. He knew his wife better than she realized. What kind of instructions? He documented her behavior, her attitudes toward family obligations, her materialistic tendencies. He also installed security cameras in the house that she doesn't know about. We have recordings of how she treated you in those final weeks. The cameras? I remembered now seeing Michael fiddling with some kind of electronic equipment in the months before his death, but I'd assumed it was just another one of his home improvement projects. We have her on tape reducing your food portions, withholding medications, verbal abuse, and the actual conversation where she threatened you with adult protective services, Robert continued. Michael may be gone, but he's still protecting you. I broke down completely then, sobbing with a mixture of grief, relief, and overwhelming gratitude for my son. Even in death, he'd been looking out for me, anticipating the betrayal I'd been too naive to see coming. Mr. Hartley, I need you to pack whatever belongings you have. I'll be there in 3 hours to take you home. What do I tell them here? Tell them you're checking out for medical reasons, which is true. You're getting the medical care you should have been receiving all along. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for several minutes, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. The other residents shuffled past me, going about their daily routines, unaware that the broken old man they'd been ignoring was about to reclaim his life. I thought about Violet, probably at that moment planning her next expensive vacation or shopping spree, secure in the belief that she'd successfully eliminated the one obstacle to her total freedom. She had no idea that the trap Michael had set was about to spring shut around her. For the first time in months, I smiled. Robert arrived at Sunshine Manor exactly 3 hours later, just as he'd promised. I was waiting in the lobby with my 2 suitcases, the same ones Violet had given me when she'd discarded me like an old piece of furniture. But this time, I wasn't leaving as a defeated, broken man. I was leaving as someone who'd just discovered he still had power. The drive back to what had been Michael's house, what was now legally my house again, gave me time to process everything Robert had explained. The medication manipulation, the documented abuse, the security footage Michael had secretly installed. My son had known his wife better than I'd ever imagined. How long did Michael suspect? I asked as we pulled into the familiar driveway. He started having doubts about 6 months before his death, Robert replied, putting the car in park. He came to me wanting to add additional protections to his will. He said Violet had made some comments about elderly care and family obligations that concerned him. I stared at the house I'd been forced to leave. It looked different somehow, showier, new landscaping, expensive outdoor furniture, a fountain that hadn't been there before. Violet had been spending Michael's money on luxuries while I'd been eating institutional food and wearing clothes that hung off my skeletal frame. "She's not here," Robert said, checking his phone. According to her social media, she's in Napa Valley for the week, wine tasting and spa treatments. We entered through the front door, and I was struck by how much had changed in just 4 months. The warm, homey touches that had made this place feel like Michael's sanctuary were gone, replaced by cold, expensive-looking artwork and furniture that screamed money but felt sterile and unwelcoming. "The master bedroom," Robert said, leading me upstairs. Michael's cameras were hidden throughout the house, but the most damning footage was recorded here and in the kitchen. He showed me to what had been Michael and Violet's bedroom, now clearly decorated to Violet's taste alone. All traces of my son had been erased and replaced with gaudy luxury items that probably cost more than most people made in a year. "I've arranged for Dr. Martinez to come here tomorrow to evaluate you and adjust your medications," Robert said, as I sat on the edge of the bed. "I've also contacted a physical therapist and a nutritionist. We're going to get you back to where you should be." "What about Violet? When will she find out?" Robert's smile was grim. "I've arranged for a process server to meet her at the spa resort tomorrow morning. She'll be served with papers informing her that she's lost all rights to Michael's estate due to violations of Clause 4, and that she has 72 hours to vacate the premises." Just like that? Just like that. "The evidence is overwhelming, Mr. Hartley. The medical records showing medication tampering, the security footage of abuse, the financial records showing she spent inheritance money on luxuries while placing you in substandard care. No court in the country would side with her." That night, I slept in Michael's house for the first time in 4 months. I'd chosen to stay in the guest room where I'd briefly lived before. The master bedroom felt too much like Violet's space now, and besides, I wanted to be comfortable rather than surrounded by her expensive mistakes. Dr. Martinez arrived the next morning, as promised. After a thorough examination, he confirmed what Robert had suspected. "Your condition is certainly manageable, Eric," he said, shaking his head in dismay. "The medications you were given at Sunshine Manor were completely inappropriate for your case, and the timing of doses you described from your final weeks here would have deliberately worsened your symptoms. So I wasn't losing my mind?" "Not at all. You were being systematically undermined." He handed me a new prescription. "These are the correct medications, properly timed. You should see significant improvement within a week." The physical therapist arrived that afternoon. She was a cheerful woman named Lisa, who took one look at me and immediately got to work. "We're going to get you back on your feet," she announced, literally and figuratively. It was around 3 o'clock when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. "Eric?" The voice was frantic, desperate. "Violet." "Hello, Violet." "What the hell is going on? Some man just served me papers saying I've lost everything. He says you're back in the house." I found myself remarkably calm. "I am back in the house. My house. Your house. Eric, you're confused. The will left everything to me. You need care, remember? Professional care." "Actually, Violet, I remember everything quite clearly now that I'm on the correct medications." There was silence on the other end of the line. "The cameras, Violet. Michael installed cameras. We have footage of everything you did to me." I could hear her breathing become rapid and shallow. "Cameras? Every conversation, every meal you withheld, every medication you deliberately gave me at the wrong time, every threat you made, all of it recorded." "That's impossible. Michael knew exactly who you were," I interrupted. "He protected me even after his death." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When Violet spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the frantic desperation, replaced by cold, calculated anger. "You think you've won something, you pathetic old man? You think this changes anything?" "I think it changes everything. You're still going to die in that house, Eric. Alone, sick, forgotten. And when you do, everything will go to me anyway. I'm still Michael's widow." "Actually, that's not how it works," Robert's voice came from behind me. He'd been listening to the conversation. "Would you like me to explain the rest of Clause 4 to her?" I handed him the phone. "Mrs. Hartley, this is Robert Chen. By violating the terms of Michael's will through abuse and neglect of his father, You've forfeited not only your current inheritance, but any future claim to the estate. Even after Mr. Hartley's death, the estate will go to the charities Michael specified, not to you." I could hear Violet screaming on the other end of the line, but Robert continued calmly. "You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from the house. Anything left behind becomes part of the estate. Any attempt to damage or steal property will result in criminal charges." He ended the call and turned to me. "She'll probably try to fight this in court, but she has no legal standing." Michael was very thorough. Over the next few days, I watched from the window as moving trucks came and went. Violet returned once, escorted by a sheriff's deputy, to ensure she didn't cause trouble. She looked different, smaller somehow, less commanding. The expensive clothes and jewelry couldn't hide the fact that her world had just collapsed. She saw me watching from the living room window and stopped to stare at me. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. I saw fury there and hatred, but also something else, the realization that she'd underestimated both Michael and me. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just watched as she climbed into her expensive car, one of the few things she'd be able to keep, and drove away from the house she'd thought would be her kingdom forever. Within 2 weeks of returning home, I was feeling better than I had in months. The correct medications had stabilized my symptoms dramatically. Regular meals and physical therapy were rebuilding my strength. Most importantly, I was no longer living under the constant stress of emotional abuse. I kept some of Michael's furniture and belongings, but I sold most of Violet's expensive additions and used the money to make the house more accessible for my needs. I had grab bars installed in the bathrooms, a stair lift put in, and converted the downstairs den into a comfortable bedroom so I wouldn't have to navigate stairs every day. The money, all $37 million of it, was more than I could ever spend in my remaining years. I set up a trust to ensure I'd never want for medical care or assistance, and I began researching charities that helped families dealing with Parkinson's disease. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was knowing that Michael had loved me enough to protect me even after his death, and that justice, quiet, thorough justice, had prevailed. 6 months later, I received a Christmas card from Violet. It was postmarked from a small town in Ohio, and the return address was for a garden apartment complex. Inside was a single sentence: "I hope you're happy." I was. Not because of her downfall, but because I'd learned something important in those dark months at Sunshine Manor. Resilience doesn't come from avoiding hardship. It comes from surviving it and choosing to rebuild rather than retreat. I kept that Christmas card on my refrigerator for a while, then eventually threw it away. I didn't need reminders of Violet anymore. Instead, I filled my home with photos of Michael, memories of the good times, and evidence of the love that had ultimately triumphed over greed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in Michael's old chair and think about the cameras he'd installed to protect me. My son had known that love sometimes means preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. He'd given me not just an inheritance, but the tools to reclaim my dignity when someone tried to steal it. That was a gift worth more than $37 million. That was a son's love that reached beyond death to ensure his father would never truly be alone.